Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning. Today's session will be our concluding discussion of Vijay Tendulkar's plays. This lecture will precede the last lecture we had, discussion we had on Thursday on Girish Karnad's play Hayavadana. Let us conclude our discussion of Vijay Tendulkar's play with a last play called Kanyadaan. Right? And Kanyadaan has around 7 characters. You have the main characters, Gandhian socialist family, comprising Nath Devalikar, who is a Gandhian socialist, his wife Seva, who is a feminist activist, their daughter Jyoti, and their son Jay Prakash. There is also a Dalit writer and poet named Arun Athavale, the Dalit character in the play, and you have some of his other friends and Hamir Rao Kamble and Vaman Seth Nevregaonkar.
Ekdam correct. I like the sound of my own voice. That is why I am in politics.
Rahudya, don't bring your politics into this house.
I've decided to get married. His name is Arun Athavale.
Pakya, if Jyoti was marrying an upper caste boy instead of a Dalit, it wouldn't have made me as happy. I'm just telling you frankly.
Don't you think that's also a form of casteism?
He's a writer. Actually, it's his poems that drew me to him.
Seva, the old reformers didn't just talk about widow remarriage. They married widows themselves. Those were experiments, difficult experiments, but that didn't stop them.
My daughter's life is not an experiment.
After reading his autobiography, I felt I could do anything to make him happy.
Just because he's Dalit?
I don't care that he's a Dalit. We've fought untouchability our whole lives. But Jyoti's been raised a certain way, with certain values. You can't change that overnight.
I am going to marry him.
I will oppose this marriage.
Seva, we are guilty of betraying these people for generations. This will be yet another betrayal.
My decision is final.
I'm with you.
So this rather intense play comprises of 2 acts, and each act has 2 scenes. The play is largely set in Nath Devalikar's house. If you look at the opening description of Act 1, it is set in his house, which has pictures of Mahatma Gandhi, Acharya Narendra Dev, Yusuf Meherali and Sanya Guruji hanging on the walls. Right? So the entire play is really about the marriage between the daughter of this Gandhian socialist family, Jyoti, and Arun Athavale, the Dalit writer and poet. And the play is constantly struggling between trying to reconcile the Gandhian socialist ideals of Jyoti's parents with, especially her father, with Arun Athavale, who is this very bitter and alcoholic Dalit writer and poet, a man who marries Jyoti, agrees to marry her, and out of his own love, he says, while Jyoti and her father Nath Devalikar wish to make her marriage to Arun into some kind of a social experiment, an experiment with that has to do with trying to transcend and overcome social barriers, caste especially. But of course, this experiment by the end of the play seems to fail when the marriage becomes violent, and but towards the end of the play, Jyoti actually agrees to stick by her choice and stays on with Arun despite the violence. So let us look at the opening scene of this first act, which has all these pictures of these different of Gandhi and other social activists hanging on the wall. Nath Devlalikar is approaching 60, yet appears active, is on the telephone. Jyoti is going to turn 20, and Jayaprakash is his 23-year-old son. Jyoti is doing some secretarial work for her father, while Jayaprakash has dismantled a household appliance and engaged in repairing it. As the children are actually engaged in repairing something, fixing something, Nath says, Jyoti asks him, why do you always bother to get the phone fixed? Why do you bother to ask each time? You know from experience that nobody answers properly. Besides, you leave it only when it is convenient for you, and in general, your bus does take you there. Right. So let's look at the opening lines that begins the first act with Nath shouting into the phone, and he says, "Hello, at what time does the bus leave for Asangaon? Hello, the Asangaon bus. Pune Asangaon. Yes, Pune Asangaon. No bus service on that route? How can that be? Oh yes, of course there's a bus service. I'm telling you, I have taken it. Yes, your own bus." This is Nath Devlalikar speaking. Member, State Legislative Councillor. Keep your member greetings for later. First, please take the trouble to inform me of the time of departure. What time? He puts the receiver down frustrated. The lines got cut. First, I couldn't get the number. When I got it, I couldn't hear anything. These people don't know a thing about their own bus service. And now, the lines got cut. A strange business altogether. Tells me the bus doesn't go there. Heaven knows who made him controller. So he's unable to get the bus timings because his phone gets cut. And so Jyoti asks, why do you bother to ask each time? You know from experience that nobody answers properly. Besides, you leave only when it is convenient for you. And in general, your bus does not take you there. It does take you there. Nath, that's not the point. The point is that these people don't even have proper information about their own bus service. And since when has it been possible to get information by making phone calls? Jyoti asks. Nath, that's not the question. The controller must be fully informed about every single bus which departs from his terminal. After all, hasn't he been appointed for just this purpose? Jyoti, Bhai, the way you talk, it's as if you have been specially appointed for the task of reminding all the people in the world of their duties. So this, of course, is Nath takes on a very typical Gandhian voice as someone who believes that everyone is indispensable in this world in terms of the duties that they have to perform. Everybody has been designated a particular duty and responsibility in the world, and it's their responsibility to actually perform it to their best. Nath, our Jayaprakash here, he has given us a new name, the repairers of the world. But you two are still young. You won't be able to understand the visions we had of the future of this nation before independence. And what we are forced to see today, disgusting. It hurts. To Jyoti, have you cleaned my lime juice flask? Last time my shaving brush was left behind, and oh yes, the towel. How can I do without it? It's not nice to be somebody's guest and keep asking for trifles. So Nath embodies that generation of people who was born before independence, who took part in the freedom struggle and had great visions for the future, but then has been disillusioned after independence, after the fervor of the freedom struggle, has realized that the nation is too rife with corruption to to flourish, right? To be able to conform to that ideal vision of a bright nation. Seva, on the other hand, is a woman who is extremely active in her activism. She travels a lot on rallies, demanding for better lives for other women, especially working class women. And you can also see both husband and wife trying to struggle to actually make their marriage work, in terms of the fact that Nath is very proud of the fact that he says, we have a democracy in this house and we are proud of it. Democracy outside and dictatorship in the home, we don't know these two timing tricks. So he presents himself as somebody who is very liberal and freedom giving, and is not somebody who controls his wife, while his wife is somebody who seems to be rather independent, traveling on her own, going on these rallies for demanding equal rights for women. And that is when Jyoti decides to confess to her parents that she has decided to get married to Arun Athavale. And the parents are very curious initially to know who the boy is, and when they know that he is Dalit, Seva and her son Jayaprakash, that is Jyoti's brother, are rather upset. They don't really want her to get married to a Dalit person. The father, on the other hand, is delighted. Initially, from the sound of the name Athavale, he thinks that, or he assumes that the boy is Brahmin, and he looks like he's a little disappointed. But when he gets to know that he is Dalit, the father is actually elated, because he believes that this is now the opportunity for them to transcend caste barriers and to live it, to actually live the possibility of going beyond caste. Until now, it has really been their lives as activists, their lives outside the home, that has seen them champion the cause of Dalits. But now here's a chance that Jayaprakash and his daughter get to actually live their very ideals. And Jyoti tells them that she first met Arun in the socialist study group. And while Seva wants to know more about the boy and his parents, whether he has a comfortable job or not, whether he'll be able to financially support Jyoti or not, Nath is just happy that he is someone who is Dalit. Right? He's only happy that the boy is Dalit. Jyoti says his parents live in a village. There's a village called Chiroli near Karhat. They have a bit of land there. And later we discover that Arun belongs to a family of manual scavengers, and that they have over the generations gradually acquired a little bit of money, and Arun is able to send some money home every month, but then they are not very well off, right? In fact, they are probably debt-ridden, agricultural family, acquired some land. And Jyoti also tells her parents that one of the reasons that she fell in love with him was because of his abilities to write poems and books, and so she is drawn to his aesthetic, his rather radical, revolutionary aesthetic. Seva and Jayaprakash are not very happy with Jyoti's choice to marry someone simply on the basis of his writings. They think that it's a risk that Jyoti is taking to marry someone whose social background, whose behavior, whose habits may not match with theirs. Right? So they're rather concerned and skeptical of this possibility of marrying a Dalit person. But Nath is insistent on allowing Jyoti to make her own independent decisions of her own life. He doesn't want to actually impose himself. In fact, he encourages her to marry him so that they can actually fight untouchability and caste. So for Seva, it still matters that a woman look for financial stability in a marriage, but despite the fact that she herself was campaigning against untouchability with her husband, but she also looks for financial stability for her daughter. But Nath, in some sense, is a lot more idealistic than his wife, because he believes that they will be able to transcend the barriers of caste and make that itself a basis for a strong marriage. But in the second scene of Act 1, Arun enters the house and he is introduced to Jyoti's family, and he is aged about 24, 25, and he is dark complexioned. It is, the stage directions say that it is a harsh face and yet it is good looking. And initially Jyoti and Arun are alone together, and Arun's reaction to the house is one of suffocation and fear. He says that he feels uncomfortable in Jyoti's larger house, and he says, if you see my father's hut, you'll understand. 10 of us, big and small, lived in that 8 feet by 10 feet. The heat of our bodies to warm us in winter. No clothes on our back, no food in our stomach, but we felt very safe. Here, these damn houses of the city people, they're like the bellies of sharks and crocodiles, each one alone in them. So he feels that he's being engulfed and swallowed by the large house. So he doesn't feel comfortable living there or even being there. Which is why later on, when Nath offers to have his daughter and his son-in-law live with him in the house, they refuse. And then later on, Arun says, as for me, I feel safe on the street. The bigger the crowds, the safer I feel. My heart shudders when walls of cement and concrete surround me. I feel I must get up, run, get lost in the crowd. Later on, Arun also gives Jyoti a description of his ancestors, his forefathers. Arun wonders if Jyoti feels uncomfortable in his presence. He wonders if Jyoti thinks that he is not worthy of marriage because of his social background. He says, our grandfathers and great-grandfathers used to roam barefoot miles and miles in the heat, in the rain, day and night, till the rags on their butt fell apart. Used to wander shouting, Johar, Mai Bap, Sir, Madam, Sweeper, and their calls polluted the Brahmin's ears. Generation after generation, their stomachs used to the stale, stinking bread they have begged. Our tongues always tasting the flesh of dead animals and with relish. Surely we can't fit into your unwrinkled Tinopal world. How can there be any give and take between our ways and your fragrant ghee spread, wheat bread culture? Will you marry me and eat stinking bread with spoiled dal in my father's hut without vomiting? Tell me, Jyoti, can you shit every day in our slums village toilet like my mother? Can you beg, quaking at every door, for little grass for our buffaloes? Come on, tell me. Right? And Jyoti covers her hand. So Arun is constantly trying to remind Jyoti of what she is in for if she decides to get married to him. The deprivation that she will face, the poverty, the stigma of being married to a Dalit, and so on. And you thought of marrying me, Arun says. Our life is not the socialist service camp. It is hell, and I mean hell, a hell named life. So there's a clear disjuncture between socialism, the ideals of socialism, the way socialism is thought and intellectualized, and the practice, the actual ground reality of being Dalit and living the oppressed and poor and deprived life of a Dalit. Sorry, moods out. Happens often. This is when Jyoti starts crying, and Arun says, at times a fire blazes. I want to set fire to the whole world, strangle throats, rape and kill. Drink up the blood of the beasts, your high caste society. Then I calm down like a tantric when he comes out of his trance. Like a corpse I live on. I've made you suffer, I'm sorry. What am I but a troublemaker? So Arun is unable to reconcile his ideological relationship with upper caste people, with the hatred that he feels for upper caste people, and his impulse to actually burn the world, to destroy all upper caste people. But on the same time, he is also trying to unable to reconcile this impulse of his ideological hatred for upper caste people with his love for a dominant caste woman named Jyoti and his violence, his violent responses to her. So he gets into these moods, these angry, enraged moods, but then also feels extremely sorry and contrite when he sees Jyoti crying. And this constantly recurs throughout the play, where Arun is this heavy drinker. He's an alcoholic, and it's his alcoholism that triggers a lot of his rage against dominant caste people. And his beatings are in some sense symbolic of his desire for revenge against the upper caste people who have perpetrated such injustice towards his community. And there's a constant refrain that Arun comes up with throughout the play, which is Hasli re hasli, ek Bamanin fasli, which translates as it's a jolly game, caught a Brahmin dame. Right? So it's almost a rather sexist and casteist comment which suggests that Arun feels that, he chuckles and he's almost happy, and that he has managed to trap or seduce a Brahmin woman. And despite the fact that he's Dalit, right? So it's almost brings out the double standards, the double sexual standards of the caste system, where a lower caste man cannot marry an upper caste woman without being punished. There's another incident before Jyoti's family appears. Just as Jayaprakash, Jyoti's brother, enters, he notices that Jyoti has been crying, and Jyoti says, God knows what he must have thought. And Arun says, just this, that I beat you. Jyoti, in a soft caressing voice, just look at the wife beater. Arun, why? Is it so difficult to beat you? Jyoti, I'm not one of those delicate touch me not creatures. I belong to the Seva Dal tradition, of course referring to her mother's activism. And in a split of a second, Arun grabs her arm and twists it, and Jyoti moans in pain. She doesn't know how to react. She's confused and hurt. There's a lump in her throat, and she tries to blow up upon the arm to reduce the pain. And Arun suddenly feels sorry, and he doesn't know what's come over him. And he says, give me any punishment you like. So Arun is constantly oscillating between this violent rage and self-pity and contrition. And of course, her mother and brother notice the bruise on her arm. Seva is not convinced that she actually wants to get Jyoti married to Arun. She doesn't trust him. She doesn't know from his answers. She asks him, she interrogates him, she asks him many questions about what he wants to do with his future. Arun just says, I have a BA, and he doesn't know what he's going to do next. And Seva is not convinced that Arun will ever have a good job, enough money to be able to support her daughter. And that is when Arun tries to shock Seva's middle class sensibilities, her desire for son-in-law with a stable job, when he says that there's good money in brewing liquor, only you must know the technique. And Seva is shocked and silenced. And of course, Arun does this intentionally in order to shock and silence Seva. And Arun says it's a first-class profession for two persons. The man bribes the police and the wife serves customers. People call her auntie. The more striking the auntie's looks, the brisker the trade. And so Seva is shocked with his boorish, unrefined behavior. Even Jyoti feels rather uncomfortable and awkward now that Arun has said this to her mother. But when Nath enters, he embraces Arun and he wishes to accept him, to embrace him as a part of his own family. And there's a certain paternalistic liberalism about Nath's behavior that also makes Arun rather uncomfortable. So Nath's only intention is to embrace this man, to make him accept him as part of his family, to completely erase any social caste differences between them. He also praises him for his masculinity, for the creative stories that he writes, right, for his poems and so on. Nath says, I'm really happy, Arun. Let us celebrate over a cup of tea. Well, nowadays, our socialists don't mind even liquor. But in this matter, I continue to be somewhat old-fashioned. A little worm called Gandhi ate into my brain in youth. Didn't he? Therefore, certain things slipped out of my life forever. Liquor is one, fancy clothes is another, and something else. Celibacy would have been my lot, but a mishap occurred. Winks at him. That which they call a sweet mishap, just like it has happened to you. Right? So, of course, Nath retains certain Gandhian principles like renouncing alcohol and not wearing foreign cloth, of course with the exception of celibacy, because he actually ends up marrying Seva. Then later he says, Nath, Seva, until today, break the caste system was a mere slogan for us. I've attended many intercaste marriages and made speeches, but today I have broken the caste barrier in the real sense. My home has become Indian in the real sense of the term. I'm happy today, very happy. I have no need to change my clothes today. Today I have changed. I have become new. My friend, do you smoke? I don't. But we have cigarettes if you like. Just the day before yesterday, Anuji returned don't know which international congress he had gone to attend, he brought some packets of cigarettes. So obviously Nath is not a strict Gandhian in the sense that he doesn't follow each and every Gandhian principle. He even he even offers cigarettes to Arun, even though he doesn't smoke himself. He also wants to present himself as somebody who's modern, somebody who's changing with the times. So he says there's nothing wrong in smoking. He even mentions the famous dancer Sonal Mansingh, who has been seen smoking cigars. And then he also says a little bit more patronizingly later, just think, did it strike anyone that you Dalit people would stand up and flex your muscles and challenge the establishment as you're doing now? But after he leaves, Seva complains about him, saying that he is a man who claimed to brew liquor for a profession, right? And so Nath dismisses her, saying that so what, brewing liquor is a hard fact in our society. Seva says, would you like to know what he said to me? He wants to run a liquor den with his wife. He said the children would be washing glasses and plates, fetching pan for customers. Nath is a little shaken, but then he controls himself and he says he must have been joking. And he also believes he's still trying to support Arun at this point, saying that we need to be more conscious of our own Western veneers of civilization, and that is exactly what it's our civilizational pretensions, our Western inflected refinement that has made us judgmental and prejudiced towards people like Arun, who seem to have none of those trappings of Western culture and refinement. Even Jayaprakash is not very encouraging of the marriage. He feels that Arun will end up destroying his sister's life. Then later on, Nath says, not only is he not a middle class man, he is a Dalit. He has been brought up in the midst of poverty and hatred. These people's psychological makeup is altogether different. We must try to understand him, and that is extremely difficult. Seva, if you like, I am ready to attend your study circle on this subject, but I will never accept him as my Jyoti's husband. Never. Look, Seva, Nath says, society cannot be transformed through words alone. We have to act as catalysts in this transformation. The old social reformers did not stop with making speeches and writing articles on widow remarriage. Many of them actually married widows. Why did they do it? That was also an experiment, a difficult experiment, but they dared to risk it. Right? So he believes that his daughter's marriage to Dalit will also be a difficult experiment, which is not impossible. Right? So it's only through marriage, through intercaste marriage, by accepting a Dalit person as part of one's own family, that one will actually slowly be able to create change and transformation. Seva says, does it mean that my daughter's life is to be used for an experiment? Is that what you're saying? You may have your views. I cannot accept them. I am her mother. Jyoti later on, when Nath asks her for her objective assessment of Arun, she says that she doesn't really know him very well. She's only read his poetry and his writings, and that is one of the reasons why she fell in love with him. And she says, not only getting to know him, but also getting to know about him. And sometimes he shows such a different side that it strikes me, I don't know him at all. At times I feel I can trust him, but the very next instant I'm left miles behind him. I ask myself, this thing that I want to do, is it the right thing? I'm afraid that my own mind assures me that he is not bad at heart. By nature, he is not vile. He is complex. Human beings are complex. It is possible that his complexity has been generated by his circumstances. I must understand that complexity. It is no use running away. Once I understand it, I can dispel that complexity. And even if I am not able to dispel it, it would no longer have the power to scare me. And this is Jyoti's initial assessment or initial presupposition of Arun, that she believes that there is something potentially good in everyone, including Arun. That like her father, she believes that certain people, certain characters have evil propensities, but those evil, aggressive, violent propensities can be overlooked with time and will not have the power to scare her, to control her. Nath is still a little skeptical, and one wonders if whether Jyoti has done the right thing in saying yes to that man, although he later on does encourage her to get married to him. Seva is very much against the marriage, and she wants her daughter to actually reconsider her decision. Nath encourages her, saying, all right then, Jyoti has made a decision for herself. All discussion on this subject is closed. Hereafter, all of us must forget our differences of opinion and go along with Jyoti. Whatever support she may need, we must give wholeheartedly. What do you think, Jayaprakash? Jayaprakash says, I will try. Nath says, not just try, you must support her. We have practiced democracy in the real sense in our home. This tradition should continue. Differences of opinion should be expressed, but the decision should be left to the individual, and the rest of us must provide support. Seva, even after knowing that such a decision will prove disastrous? Nath, yes, even then, whatever needs to be said should be said. After that, we shall accept the decision, knowing that it has been made with due consideration. Not by me, Seva says, it won't be. You run your democracy. To me, Jyoti's decision seems to be absolutely senseless, and as her mother, I cannot accept it. This is a home, not your party where you can impose your discipline. Nath says, I am on Jyoti's side. It is perfectly natural that the boy should have rough edges. They are the product of the circumstances he has endured. In fact, it would be surprising if these peculiarities didn't exist. But just because he has them, it doesn't mean he's a bad fellow. He may not be a gentleman, but neither is he a scoundrel. As a human being, he has potential. He has intelligence, drive, and creativity. He has come so far despite his circumstances. This is not an easy matter. It is a result of his effort and dedication. You cannot imagine at what cost these people have made the little progress they have made. He is like unrefined gold. He needs to be melted and molded. This is the need of the hour. Who can perform this task if not girls like Jyoti? Of course it is difficult, but it needs to be done. Besides, she has given her word. Remember, it is we who are responsible for the age-old sufferings of these people. We have betrayed them for generations. We should feel guilty about this. And now if Jyoti breaks her word, if she wriggles out of her responsibilities, it would be a kind of treachery. It would amount to running away from the challenge. As a father, I would feel ashamed if my daughter were to run away. I am with you, Jyoti. What you are doing could be both wise and foolish. But one thing is certain, it upholds the norms of civilized humanity, and therefore I stand by you. Right? So what Nath says is that he stands by his daughter's choice to take on the marriage as a social experiment, as a social challenge that would potentially transgress and ultimately dismantle the boundaries of caste. And he also is convinced that they are responsible. He, as in his caste community, feels guilty for the oppression that people like Arun have faced for generations. He still believes in the potential for good in Arun, and he thinks that everything else, all his rough edges, all the unrefinement that he sees in Arun may just be something that could easily be brushed aside, because he, Arun, like all human beings, has the potential to be intelligent, to have the drive and creativity. So on one hand, he seems to acknowledge the oppressive circumstances under which Arun has come this far, he says, despite his constraints, for which upper caste people like him are responsible. So he feels that he needs to redeem what his people, his community has done to Arun's community by getting his daughter married to Arun. So it almost seems to be this redemptive act, this compensatory act for social injustice. But it becomes very clear soon after the marriage that Jyoti is no longer herself. She hardly visits her parents. She lives with Arun, and that she is undergoing a lot of suffering and pain because of Arun's violent behavior. Nath still has faith in his daughter's decision, and he hopes that Jyoti will make the marriage work at any cost. So he thinks that he is not a hypocrite. He thinks that he lives by the very principles that he preaches to others, that he will always be a responsible man. He will always look for the good in every human being. He will be able to overlook all the evil propensities that a human being has in order to be able to arrive at that virtuous kernel, that core, that good core in every human being. So Nath puts the onus of responsibility on Jyoti, that Jyoti will be responsible for her marriage, and that even if she fails at the attempt, even if she ends up regretting her decision, right, he will support her. Right? He will support her for as long as Jyoti realizes or thinks that she is not meant to be married to Arun. But until then, the father does not intervene in the daughter's marriage. Right? So there's a strong emphasis on individual responsibility. Everyone has their own responsibility and to act in the way that they deem fit. Right? Nobody else can intervene. And of course, there's this added pressure out here because this marriage is, after all, a social experiment. So it has to work in order to confirm or corroborate Nath's Gandhian socialist ideals. Even when he sees Jyoti weeping, when he realizes that Jyoti is not happy in the marriage, he says, Jyoti, I'm going to say something entirely different now. Think about it. Talk to Arun and let us know your decision after that. There is no hurry. You can take your time. It is a good thing that we, as usual, are here, all here together. And don't think I was struck by this idea now, all of a sudden. For many days I've been wanting to say it. In fact, last night I had decided to tell all of you. That's why I returned from Bombay today. Jyoti, from now on, I want both of you to stay here. So he offers his house to Jyoti and her husband. Wait, let me finish what I have to say. After that, everyone will be given the opportunity to voice his or her opinion. I will also tell you why I thought of it. Our Jyoti got married and Arun had expected to get a single room, at least temporarily. Sometimes our calculations go wrong. So we decided that until definite arrangements were made for other accommodation, Jyoti would stay with her parents while Arun looked for a place. It is not possible to find a house in Pune unless you shell out a huge deposit. Nor is there any certainty as to when such a place will be found. I don't think it is right that after marriage a couple should stay apart for an indefinite length of time. Right? So he offers his house to Arun and Jyoti because Arun hasn't been able to find a single room flat. So we can accommodate him, he says. It's also symbolic way of saying we can actually accommodate a Dalit in our lives. But Jyoti is reluctant and refuses because she has abandoned him. He will not enter this house because I have left him. I'm not going back to him again. And Nath is very upset that she has decided to leave her husband. But for him, it's a big betrayal to his own idealistic expectations. Later on, Arun enters the house and he feels extremely sorry for having beaten Jyoti up. He starts crying. He even has a small pocket knife with which he tries to actually slit his wrists. But then Nath and Jaiprakash stop him from doing that. He's actually unable to answer Seva's question. When Seva is indignant and asks Arun why he beats Jyoti up, he says, what am I but the son of scavengers? We don't know the non-violent ways of Brahmins like you. We drink and beat our wives. We make love to them, but the beating is what gets publicized. Early, he says, whenever I claim that I'm civilized and cultured like your people, from childhood, I have seen my father come home drunk every day and beat my mother half dead, seen her cry her heart out. Even now I hear the echoes of her broken sobs. No one was there to wipe her tears. My poor mother, she didn't have a father like Bhai, not a mother like you. So Seva is not convinced with any of his responses to her question of why he beats Jyoti. None of Arun's responses are convincing because he seems to constantly reiterate the fact that he has lived an oppressed life. He has lived a life where his father has returned home drunk and beaten his wife up, has also made love to her, probably even forced himself on her. Right? And this is the life that he has seen. This is what marriage has meant to him. Marriage has been a very violent transaction, an institution that rationalizes domestic abuse and violence. So he says that we also make love to our wives, but it's the beating that gets publicized. So Seva is unable to be convinced by any of his responses. The fact that historical injustice, structural oppression has been meted out to his community is no justification for his violent behavior towards Jyoti. So on one hand you have domestic abuse and violence, and on the other you have the historical injustices perpetrated onto the Dalit community by dominant caste groups. And one cannot in some sense justify the other. Right? So even though they believe that there's a point when Nath believes that only people who have suffered like Arun have would know what suffering is. But here clearly that's not the case, right? Because he never hesitates to beat Jyoti up when he is drunken stupor. And Arun also puts the onus of responsibility on Jyoti. He says that She's the one who decided to marry me. It's her choice. I never forced her to stay in the marriage. So it's the responsibility is hers to actually make the marriage work and not mine. So she was actually fully aware of what she was going to get into, and she continued to stay with me even though I beat her. And so it's entirely her responsibility to make it work. And Nath actually seconds that statement of Arun's, and he actually encourages his daughter to make the marriage work, to go back to him. In the second scene of the second act, Nath is admiring and appreciating Arun's autobiography. Right? I mean, he's unable to reconcile the fact that on one hand, Arun is able to portray with great sensitivity the oppressions of that his community has suffered in his autobiographical novel and his poetry, but on the other hand ends up being a rather violent and aggressive man who has made Jyoti very unhappy. Right? So he's unable to actually put these two together. Right? So on one hand, his reading of Arun's autobiographical novel wins his sympathy, and Seva, of course, is dismissive of Arun. She believes that Arun is a hypocrite, that he doesn't mean a word of what he says in his novel, and whatever sensitivity he may exhibit in his writings has been completely contradicted by his violent behavior towards his wife. Nath is also extremely enraged when he gets to know that Jyoti, who's now pregnant, has been kicked and abused by Arun. Seva is determined to bring her daughter back home, but Nath still wants to give it one more chance to see if the marriage can be made to work. And in the meanwhile, Nath has been asked to preside as a chairman over an award function. Arun's autobiographical novel has been awarded the Sahitya Academy, and he and along with some other writers and leaders have come there to request Nath to preside, to chair the award ceremony. And Seva, of course, is extremely indignant because he feels that Arun's work is just the work of a hypocrite, somebody whose sensitivity towards suffering in his novel does not correspond with his actual behavior towards his wife. Jayaprakash brings the example of the Israelis who have been in the news, who have been attacking Palestinians and stopping their water and food supplies and bombing them and razing villages. And they don't seem to have learned from their own suffering at the hands of the Nazis. So this, in some sense, is a similar concern in many of Tendulkar's plays, where, and we also saw this in Kashiram Kotwal, where the victim, the one who is marginalized, ends up becoming a lot more tyrannical than the forces that he opposes. Right? That it's not as though someone who is marginalized, who has been marginalized, necessarily understands or empathizes with the suffering of others. But Nath does not agree with Jayaprakash's assessment that yesterday's victim is today's victimizer. He says it's all wrong, Prakash, absolutely wrong. It is madness to arrive at a perverse conclusion on the basis of a single example. The ordinary citizens of Israel will certainly raise an outcry against such atrocities. You will see, you are denying all of human culture and civilization. That culture, an entire civilization which man has evolved over the years. So for Nath, he believes that one has to, in some sense, be able to recognize or acknowledge the divine essence, the essence of goodness in every human being, right? Irrespective of the violence that they are capable of enacting. He says that a single example, it's perverse to judge an entire race or an entire country on the basis of a single example. That he's unwilling to work by exceptions, judge an entire caste community by exceptions. That if Arun is somebody who is violent, unrefined, boorish, different in his ways, it's only understandable, it's only acceptable because he belongs to a community that has suffered historical wrong, that they have suffered structural oppression. So it's not right, according to Nath, to judge Arun on the basis of that. So Arun comes to invite Nath to chair the meeting, and he says that there are other writers like Hamirao Kamble or Vamansit Nevragaonkar, other Dalit writers like him, who have been spending money feeding other Dalit writers. Now, Nevragaonkar is a critic of Dalit literature who runs a hotel for Dalit writers. These gentlemen, he says, also have an association called the Progressive Dalit Literature Circle. And when he asks Nath to chair the meeting, Nath initially refuses. And he says that, Arun says that obviously people will assume that both father-in-law and son-in-law do not see eye to eye, they do not agree on issues, that he regularly tortures Jyoti, and so he realizes, in fact he taunts Nath, he provokes him and taunts him as a way of making him come to chair the meeting. And he says that after all, you have spent your entire life as a well-wisher of the Dalit community, that you wanted a well in every village for the Dalit. You launched a satyagraha for that cause. It's almost like as though, Nath symbolizes Gandhi himself. With the trumpet call of idealism, you got your daughter married to a Dalit. Therefore, they thought you would surely come to this discussion. Right? And so Nath is highly enraged after they leave, because he realizes that his name has been printed in the invitation card and in the advertisement without his permission. So he is wondering whether he should actually overlook his daughter's misery and praise Arun's writing at the meeting, but then he has no choice but to go. Right? In fact, he even says something rather casteist after Arun leaves. He says that this whole house stinks, and he tells his wife that the entire house has to be cleaned and purified. The hypocrisy in Nath comes out towards the end, when he's unable to accept the fact that his daughter is miserable and suffering, but yet he is torn by his ideals and principles, that he has to actually end up praising Arun's writings, notwithstanding the fact that he deeply resents him for ill-treating his daughter. And that is what, in some sense, creates a rift between father and daughter. When Jyoti listens to her father speak at the meeting, she realizes that her father is also a hypocrite, somebody who has not lived by his principles. Nath says, when Seva says, you were full of praise for Arun's book, and he says, I was a fool then, an ignorant fool, not anymore. This book is not a novel, it is an autobiography. It depicts a real person's life, and it is the responsibility of the author to stick to the truth. But the book has not even an ounce of truth in it. It is a hoax. It is a crafty, sanctimonious, artistic hoax. Nothing is real in that book, neither the man nor his values. At best, it is good fiction, and therefore, Seva, most dangerous. Because this kind of hypocrisy marks a rank opportunist. The devil lurks within that opportunist. That book is no autobiography, it is pulp fiction based on half-truths. So, the very genre of the book, which is neither autobiography nor novel, is something that seems to blur the very line between reality and fiction. That precisely because it is reality being couched in the form of fictional claims, fictional truths, that it becomes dangerous for Nath. That it is something which does not correspond to reality. That Arun, on the one hand, if he is capable of great sensitivity in the way he depicts the historical injustices perpetrated on his community, on the other hand, he does not live by that sensitivity when it comes to his own personal married life with his wife. And then Nath is transformed by the end of that act, where he says that I did not pay any attention. Initially, I thought it was Jyoti's choice and responsibility to marry a Dalit man. He thought it would be a successful social experiment to uproot caste, but then he realizes that he has made a mistake by pushing his daughter into what he calls a sea of misery. And she also he regrets the fact that his children have actually adopted his own values, right? Nath says she was guided by her father's humanism and liberalism. And he even tells his son, Jayaprakash, do me a favor, reject your father. Learn to see through his naivete and idiocy. Don't ever rely on his wisdom. If you do, you too will ruin yourself. So the failure of his daughter's marriage, the failure of that social experiment is the failure of Nath's own Gandhian socialist ideals. Right? His own humanism and liberalism have proved to be a mere hoax. So he's completely disillusioned and as he's dissolved of all his idealism by the end of the play. We see an elaboration of the sense of disillusionment towards the end of the second act in the conversation between the father and the daughter. Jyoti says, I heard it all in your speech, hired for the occasion, in your false, deceitful speech. I know what you really wanted to say. I heard what you were unable to say. Whenever your eyes fell on him, they dripped poison. After the meeting, he tried to see you. And I saw how you ignored the man you hold in such high esteem. Bhai, after today, you cannot fool me. In your heart, there's just hatred for Arun and nothing else. Nath, in a softer tone, trying to explain, you are making a mistake. I don't hate Arun. I hate only those tendencies. Jyoti, tendencies. I grew up listening to such talk day in and day out. Hatred not for the man, but for his tendencies. No man is fundamentally evil. He is good. He has certain propensities towards evil. They must be transformed, completely uprooted and destroyed. And then the earth will become heaven. It is essential to awaken the God slumbering within man. All false, vicious claptrap. The truth is, you knew very well that man and his inherent nature are never really two different things. Both are one and inseparable, and either you accept it in totality or you reject it if you can. Very often you don't have a choice. Putting man's beastliness to sleep and awakening the Godhead within it is an absurd notion. You made me waste 20 years of my life before I could discover this. I had to learn it on the strength of my own experience. I had to meet a man named Arun Athavale. Arun gave me what you had withheld from me. I must acknowledge my debt to him. So you realize now that that Jyoti is disillusioned and betrayed by the idealistic the Gandhian socialist ideals that she grew up on, which seem to claim or suggest that one has to accept a man for what he is and recognize only the Godhead, the divine essence in a man, and completely overlook his evil propensities. But then in doing so, one is actually being rather insensitive to the impact, the effect that historical injustices have on a man or a human being's upbringing and his outlook to life, right, his values. So it's not historically sensitive to larger wrongs, social wrongs, structural forms of oppression. Later on, Jyoti says that come and watch Arun at night when he staggers home roaring drunk. If you have the guts, there's a savage beast in his eyes, his lips, his face, in every single limb, and bestiality is something which cannot be separated from him. In the beginning, like an idiot, I used to search for that Arun who is above and beyond this beastliness. I used to call out to him, take him in my arms. Hard experience taught me I would always fail. Arun is both the beast and the lover. Arun is the demon and also the poet. Both are bound together, one within the other. They are one. So closely bound that at times it is not possible to distinguish the demon from the poet. Filthy cursing is a part of his frenzied love. A sudden shower of hard, ardent kisses accompanies the rain of blows. After going through these miseries, if the broken body finds some rest and wakes to engage itself in the routine, then a few lines come to hand, lines steeped in feeling, fragments of poetry filled with the throb of pain, and a fresh start is made. Love springs once again, even while the ear is defiled by plots base and vile, to defraud and trick well-wishers. All these things are done by the same person at the same time. Tell me, where is that beast I should drag out and destroy? Where is it God I should arouse from his sleep? Tell me, Arun is made of all these things bound together, and I have to accept him as he is, because I cannot reject him. Right? So she has decided to accept Arun for what he is. That this Gandhian philosophy, idealism that decides to separate or distinguish the good from the evil and privilege the good over the evil is not possible. Right? That she has to accept Arun as the very product of the structural forms of oppression that he has suffered, as his family, his community has suffered. That you cannot actually separate supposedly the violence in Arun from the tenderness, right? The intimacy from the ideological hatred that he seems to feel for people who are privileged and upper caste. One needs to accept all of it. And this is a choice that she makes and for which she takes responsibility. Later on, Jyoti says, I have to stop thinking and learn to live. I think a lot, suffer a lot. Not from the blows, but from my own thoughts. I can't bear them much longer. Forgive me, Bhai. I said things I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. I was deeply offended by your hypocrisy. I thought, why does this man have to inject and drug us every day with truth and goodness? And if he can't get away from it at will, what right did he have to close all our options? I haven't been able to forget an image I saw years ago on my way to school. A man opened the lids of 2 baskets slung upon the pole he carried on his shoulder, and from them 2 shaking, swaying, staggering creatures slipped out, human in appearance, their wrinkled skin covering twisted bodies. Someone said these people kidnap little children, break their limbs and make them cripples. Bhai, forgive me for my words, but you have made us. And she cannot go on. And then she refuses to come back home to him. And she says finally that she refuses to leave her husband. And she says, I have my husband. I'm not a widow. Even if I become one, I shan't knock at your door. I am not Jyoti Yadunath Devlalikar now. I am Jyoti Arun Athavle, a scavenger. I don't say Harijan. I despise the term. I am an untouchable, a scavenger. I am one of them. Don't touch me. Fly from my shadows, otherwise my fire will scorch your comfortable values. Right? So Jyoti completely tries to embrace her new identity as an untouchable, as a scavenger, and as someone who symbolizes the very undoing of her father's Gandhian principle, that she is no longer impressed by her father's values. She realizes that it's only her own experience of marriage to a Dalit that has taught her that she can no longer live by her father's principles. Her father has the privilege, the choice of not having to realize his ideals, his principles in the everyday, right? But his daughter has made the choice of living with a man who is at once tender, at once sensitive. On the other hand, is also a product of the historical injustices meted against Dalits. Let us conclude our discussion of Vijay Tendulkar's plays by looking at the slides. It's just a summary of the 4 plays that we've discussed so far. We began with Silence, the Court is in Session, which describes the patriarchal enslavement of women within the space of a court and a mock trial. The court itself symbolizes the space of patriarchy where Miss Binare is trapped twice, towards the end of the 2nd act and then towards the end of the 3rd act. What begins as a mock trial can no longer be distinguished from the actual play within the play by the end. Binare betrays her own crime, in quotes, inverted quotes, her own crime of bearing an illegitimate child outside marriage and falling in love with a married man named Professor Damle, who never appears on stage despite the fact that he's also responsible for the illegitimate child. Miss Binare's songs and poems suggest her own sense of isolation and loneliness. She's accused of being sexually promiscuous and of a disreputable character by the other characters in the play. The male characters of the play, including Sukhatme and Pongshe, wish to have a relationship with a bold woman, and this can be seen in the way they actually analyze, dissect her life with great salacious interest and end up gossiping about her and creating these stories about her alleged affair with the professor. But eventually they end up distancing themselves from her because she does not conform to the ideal of a chaste woman or wife. Right? So every man in some sense bears a secret desire to have a relationship with a woman like her because she's so accessible, or she seems to be very accessible, but on the other hand distance themselves from her because she does not conform to the ideal of a chaste woman or wife. Miss Binare is charged with infanticide even before her crime has been determined. She is condemned to be punished and shamed because she has desecrated the institution of marriage and motherhood by having a child outside wedlock. Her monologue towards the end of the second act is hardly a defense against the charges. It is more a conversation with herself about the significance of life and her own desire to live, to be a reputed school teacher. Because if you remember, it's her initially, she comes up, she tells the audience that her reputation has been tarnished. Her reputation as a school teacher has been tarnished because of her affair with an older married man, and because she has also conceived a child with him. She occasionally ridicules the other characters throughout the play, who are all struggling and insecure actors. But she is progressively silenced and her voice is usurped by other characters, taken on, assumed by other characters, including Mrs. Kashikar, who's also a participant and beneficiary of patriarchy, even though she is often humiliated and silenced by her own husband. Even Samant, who is initially an innocent villager and watcher and bystander, gets involved in the conspiratorial machinations of patriarchy to trap and victimize Miss Benare for her unconventional life. Miss Benare claims Professor Damle loved her for her body while she worshipped his intellect. The other characters like Pongsh and Sukatme accuse her of trying to seduce him when she wanted a man to love and be a father to her child. Karnik also believes that she had an affair with her uncle when she was young. Miss Benare has a very ambiguous relationship to her body, and this comes through in her long monologue towards the end, which is a vehicle for movement and freedom, because you also see how Miss Benare is on the one hand extremely lively and vivacious and loves her life and values life, but on the other also conceals a deep sense of hurt towards the other characters who have maligned and stigmatized her. Right? But she's also condemned to be stigmatized by others. So on one hand, if the body is a symbol for movement and freedom, on the other hand, the female body is also stigmatized by others as a bearer of either sexual disrepute and sexual stigma. In A Friend's Story, the play is narrated by an unconventional man named Bapu, who recounts his friendship with Sumitra. The play switches between past and present as Bapu steps in and out of his character as the narrator and the character in the play. Bapu is a sensitive and gentle man who is secretly in love with Sumitra but withdraws when he learns that she's a lesbian. His roommate Pandey is infatuated with Sumitra when he sees her playing a man in a play he organized for the college where they study. Sumitra is obsessed with Nama, a young woman who she acts in the play with, but Nama also has a boyfriend named Manya Dalvi, who is a conventional and aggressive macho man. Dalvi resents and violently hates Sumitra for being lesbian, and there is a violent altercation between them when he discovers her with Nama in Bapu's room. When Sumitra takes advantage of Bapu's freedom and forges his handwriting and signature to write a love letter to Nama and warns Dalvi to stay away from Nama, Dalvi assaults Bapu. So Dalvi assumes that Bapu has written that letter to Nama and that Bapu is in love with Nama, when it's actually Sumitra who forges Bapu's handwriting to write a letter and posts the letter from Bapu's locality to Nama. Sumitra shows no response for what she has gotten Bapu into. Bapu remains gentle and caring friend who tries to convince Sumitra to give up her obsession with Nama. But Sumitra is a narcissistic character who does not show her vulnerability to anyone and needs Nama to validate herself. She remains an isolated character who tries to end a largely self-imposed isolation, who tries to end her life twice in the play when her family rejects her and she discovers she's lesbian. Nama stops seeing her and it becomes clear that there's no difference between Sumitra and Dalvi's love for her, both of whom are possessive and indifferent to her own feelings. Bapu ends up feeling used by both Sumitra and Dalvi, who want his room for their rendezvous with Nama. Nama confides in Bapu, telling him of her plans to get married to another man in Calcutta. Bapu feels bad for Sumitra and tells her, but she betrays his trust and goes in search of Nama, but in vain. The latter gets married and Sumitra is completely lost. Pandey withdraws from his love for Nama, and he joins Second World War as a soldier. When he returns, he meets Dalvi and Bapu some years later, and the three of them visit a bar where they see Sumitra drunk, performing before a group of officers. This is the only time in the play when Sumitra exposes her vulnerability and considers Bapu the mother she never had. She misses their friendship, but by the end of the play, she successfully ends up committing suicide. In Ghasharam Kotwal, the play takes the form of a choral song and dance performance that depicts the hollowness of political power. The play is a political satire set during the 18th century and describes the court life of Nana Fadnavis, one of the prominent ministers of the Peshwa of Pune. It was first performed in 1972. Ghasharam is a Brahmin from Kannauj who is humiliated and beaten up by the Pune Brahmins for winning the Nana's favor. He is made Kotwal or constable of Pune in exchange for his daughter Gauri, who is to satisfy Nana's lust. Ghasharam takes his revenge by turning Pune into a moral police state, where no one has any freedom to do anything without his permission. In his attempt to fight the powers of Brahmanism, he becomes more tyrannical than the forces he opposes. The chorus of men who form props and characters in the play function to expose the irony of religious piety and the violence and greed that fuels political ambition and power. We see this in that scene when the Nana tries to seduce Gauri before the idol of Ganesha, and when Gauri reminds him that they are standing in front of the Lord out of this sheer discomfort, he says mockingly that, do you think that idol of Ganesha cares or can do anything about me and my power? Ghanshyam believes he is all powerful, but realizes his power is merely derivative of the Nana, who is himself a deputy of the Peshwa who never appears on stage. The play is about the deputation of power and how people can never recognize the true source of power. Right? So the whole play is really about deputation, how power is constantly deputed to others, delegated to others, and by the end of which it becomes impossible to actually acknowledge the absolute source of power, because Ghanshyam also thinks or imagines that he is absolutely powerful when he is not. When Ghanshyam discovers his daughter is missing and probably dead, he is unable to challenge the Nana's authority. The Nana marries another young girl, even though he has several wives. Finally, Ghanshyam is beaten up and killed by the mobs for his tyranny, while he realizes his guilt for having sacrificed his own daughter for his political ambitions. In the last play, Kanyadaan, it describes the marriage between Jyoti, the daughter of an upper caste Gandhian couple, Nath Devlalikar, and Seva, a feminist activist, and Arun Athavale, a young Dalit poet and writer, who belongs to a family of manual scavengers. The marriage is initially intended by the father and daughter to be an experiment to transcend and dismantle caste differences. Seva and her son Jayaprakash are against the marriage because of Arun's unrefined and violent ways. He beats Jyoti whenever he is drunk and because he is unemployed. There's a clear social class difference between Jyoti and Arun, which by the end of the play has not been transcended. Jyoti is unable to renounce her choice to remain married to Arun, partly because she feels responsible and hopeful that Arun will change, and partly because she has internalized her father's injunctions to never give up on the social project of reformation and forgiveness. A Christian vision, as it were, of seeing only the potential good in all people and transforming their evil propensities. She realizes she has to accept Arun for all that he is, and cannot separate his goodness from his violence, which Arun claims is an expression of the historical injustice and indignities perpetrated by upper caste people on Dalits. Arun loves her and regrets beating her, but is still unable to resist. She resents her father by the end of the play for raising her with such righteous ideals that are insensitive to the social realities of inequality and structural oppression. Nath is unable to recognize his salutary perception of Arun's poetic sensibilities and his autobiographical novel, which is a sensitive portrayal of his community's collective sufferings and his personal violence. He wishes to understand and embrace Arun through his own paternalistic benevolence, and this comes through in his hypocritical statement during a function where Arun's novel has been awarded the Sahitya Academy, where Nath has been asked to chair the meeting. But Seva is unable to accept Arun for beating Jyoti. She is determined to bring her daughter back, but Jyoti refuses to return as she decides to suffer her marriage to disavow the Gandhian ideals on which she was raised. Arun refuses all responsibility for his behavior and believes it is Jyoti's choice and responsibility to stay in the marriage. By the end, Nath asks his son to reject his own liberal humanism and realizes his own hypocrisy when he's asked to speak about the book and ends up praising it when he doesn't mean it. And we saw what actually happens towards the end of the play, where the father has to accept the fact that his ideals have not lived up to their own truth, and that the daughter in some sense also wants to disavow or get rid of the ideals that she was raised on, to embrace her new identity as the wife of an untouchable herself perhaps. So that's exactly how the play ends. Thank you.